Society. And
Sorry about that.
he just came back from one of his tours. He does many tours to Europe, and I urge everybody to accompany him because he gives you quite an enlightenment of this. And he chose a very excellent topic this time for us to speak about because there are an infinity of topics about World War One, and he's going to speak about generals from World War One who had a role in World War Two, many of them American. And remember that those wars led one to another, and they still go on to this current day. So I want to ask everybody for them to pay close attention to his delivery, and above all, ask good questions. One of the things I think best about our Zoom programs is when people ask intelligent questions of our speaker on the very topic he is focusing on. And of course, I need speakers all the way through for every second Saturday of the month. And I need one for August 10th, and I'll need one for September. I'll need one for October, November, and December. You're unlucky enough to have me in January give my discussion. But until then, I need speakers on any topic about World War I, from buckles that they wear to haircuts, anything. Please join me and let me know. Now, you'll have my phone number and email, which is one of the best ways to get a hold of me if you're interested in making a delivery. All right, let's turn this over to our speaker. Let's hear his view on this very, very exciting topic. Please.
Okay, I'm going to start the screen share. Let me go down to this and get set up. I hope all can see that. So the topic today is from World War I to World War II, a look at key ETO USA leaders. ETO USA, for those of you not into World War II as much as European Theater of Operations. So we're going to look at the American leaders in this area. We don't have much time to look at the British, but what I do want to stress is there's a lot of details in here. Don't get bogged down. Don't try to say that you have to, don't think that you have to record every date or remember every date. There's just a lot of details in here. But we're going to look basically at the heads of the, starting with George Marshall, the Chief of Staff of the United States Army. And we're going to go down through the Army commanders, and if I have time, through the Corps commanders. If it runs a little bit long, we can I can shorten that up. So here we go. It's going to be a fast-moving look at these careers. I kind of pretty much covered that already. I'm not going to cover every single detail, such as personal lives, marriages, etc. There's a lot of more stories I could put in, but this is just a real broad overview. So first of all, for those of you that don't have a military background or aren't as steeped in military, you know, you've got your various officer ranks, and that starts with second lieutenant. This is Army. The Navy would be a little bit different, but you've got second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, major, lieutenant colonel, colonel, and then you have your general ranks, which are brigadier general, major general, lieutenant general, general, which is 4-star, and general of the Army, which is 5-star. And what you're going to see through this is the progress, you know, how these soldiers progress through the various ranks as their career advances. A good number of these guys started out at the U.S. Military Academy or the Virginia Military Institute. So just keep that in mind as we go through their careers. And again, here are the people. We're going to start with the Chief of Staff, and then we're going to do the Supreme Allied Commander, Eisenhower, the Army Group, Army, and Corps commanders. And I threw in one aviation person as well. So here, starting with George Catlett Marshall. Born in 1880 from Uniontown, Pennsylvania. His father, he's a distant cousin to Chief Justice John Marshall. His father was in the coal and coke business. He went to Virginia Military Institute in the class of 1901 because he didn't believe his grades were good enough for the U.S. Military Academy, i.e. West Point. He ranked 15 out of 34. So in 1902, so he graduated in 1901. 1902, he took a competitive exam commissioned as a second lieutenant, and he joined the 30th Infantry Regiment in the Philippines. He had various postings in the Philippines. Then he took, in 1907, 5 years later, he was an honor graduate in the Infantry Cavalry School course. 1908, he graduated first in the Army Staff College course. 1916, he becomes an aide-de-camp to Major General Bell, who was commander of the Western Department and former Chief of Staff. April 1917, he moves with Bell to Governor's Island. For those of you looking for a World War I connection, just remember that Pershing and his crew left Governor's Island in May of 1917. So he ends up in the summer of 1917, he's Assistant Chief of Staff for Operations for the 1st Division. And he gets Pershing's attention when Pershing berated Major General Seibert in front of his staff. And so here's what it was said. Pershing, in late 1917, General John J. Pershing, the commander-in-chief, inspected the 1st Division. Unimpressed by what he observed, Pershing began to berate the division commander, Major General Seibert, in front of his staff, including Marshall. Seibert took Pershing's criticism in silence. But then when Pershing turned his attention to the division chief of staff, Marshall angrily interceded to inform Pershing of logistical and administrative difficulties of which Pershing was unaware. So he had the boldness to do that. As a result, or partially as a result of that, he ends up by mid-1918 moving to AEF operations. In there, he was instrumental in planning the Meuse-Argonne. I should say before that, with the 1st Division, he was instrumental in planning for the attack on Cantigny. And then in May of 1918, he planned for the Meuse-Argonne offensive. And post-war, he receives the Distinguished Service Medal for his efforts. That's a very quick overview of his World War I. And then if we go to the interwar years, here again, you can see his career just continues to progress. Notable, he's 1920 to 24, he's an aide-de-camp to General Pershing, who was Chief of Staff at the time of the United States Army. Then he goes on to teach at the Army War College. He was a planner in the War Department. He served with the 15th Infantry Regiment in China. In 1927, he became Assistant Commandant at the Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia. 1932 to 33, he serves as a commanding officer of the 8th Infantry Regiment. You can see, continue on, he becomes an adjutant. I'm having a tough time seeing my one slide under here on the final print, the printing on the bottom. But he angers the Chief of Staff, MacArthur, who was then Chief of Staff. So MacArthur sends him to Chicago as a senior instructor and Chief of Staff for the 33rd Division, which was an Illinois National Guard division. October 1936, he's promoted to Brigadier General, and then he ends up commanding the 5th Brigade, 3rd Division in Vancouver, Washington. In 1938, he is assigned to the War Plans Division. 1st of July 1939, he becomes the acting Chief of Staff, and the 1st of September, just literally 3 months later, or 2 months later, he becomes Chief of Staff just hours after the invasion of Poland. He succeeds MacArthur as Chief of Staff. Here he is, just so that you know, in the picture there on the other side, he's meeting Dutch Coda in the Elsenborn, Belgium, in I believe it's October 1944. So while he's the Chief of the Staff of the United States Army, he never led troops in combat, both World War I or World War II. But he was known as a great organizer and inspirer of many officers. Many American generals were picked or recommended by him, and this includes, but it's not limited to, Eisenhower, Devers, Patton, Clark, and Bradley. And post-World War II, he was sent in December of 45 unsuccessfully to a trip to China. I say unsuccessful because he was trying to stop the Chinese Revolution that was going on. But in 1947, he becomes Secretary of State, and he introduces the European Recovery Plan program, aka the Marshall Plan. But he resigns in early 1949 because of his health. He moved to Leesburg, Virginia after his retirement, which is just about an hour from here. I haven't toured his house yet. I've been past it, but I haven't toured it yet. And in 1950, Truman named him a Secretary of Defense. In April of 51, he relieved MacArthur, but then he retired fully in 1951. And that's when he moved to Leesburg. He died at the age of 78 at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. So we're going to step down the chain of command, if you want to call it that, and look at General Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe during World War II or during the latter end of World War II. So he was born in Denison, Texas, but for all intents and purposes, raised in Abilene, Kansas. Was the third of 7 sons with a very religious family. He went to the United States Military Academy and graduated in the class of 1915. I don't have his exact rank number, but I've one source quoted middle of the class. After World War I, he requested an assignment in the Philippines, but instead he was posted to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. He's had various postings stateside in logistics and infantry, including Fort Leavenworth. In February 1918, he's transferred to the 65th Engineers at Camp Meade in Maryland. And then he's promoted to brevet lieutenant colonel and given command of a unit that trained tank crews at Camp Colt in Gettysburg. Again, he never saw overseas service, but he demonstrated great organizational skills and ability to assess the people that he was working with. And the photo in here is a photo of the house that he lived in Gettysburg. That's the historical marker outside of it during the period where he was at Camp Colt. Intra-war, there's a lot of details here. And I don't know if I want to go through all of them. You can read some of this, but one of the most prominent is in the 1920s, he became executive officer to Fox Connor in the Panama Canal Zone. And Connor was very influential for him. He mentored him. He helped Eisenhower study history and theory while he was there with Connor. And that certainly served him very well. As you look down this list, when 1925-26, for instance, he graduated #1 in class from the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. He also, what is lesser known, is he worked at the American Battle Monuments Commission with his brother, Milton. They published American Armies and Battlefields in Europe. Milton was actually a publisher. So that certainly would have involved time working with General Pershing as well. You can see some of the other things here. I don't want to say it this way, but he played with the big boys. I mean, he accompanied MacArthur to the Philippines and was assistant military advisor to the Philippine government. Then he was promoted in March of 41 to colonel and assigned chief of staff of newly activated 9th Corps. So he starts to get into a bit of a corps command level, at least in the United States pre-war. He was appointed chief of staff to General Walter Kruger, commander of the Third Army, and he was promoted to brigadier general after the maneuvers. So, again, just the typical progression that you would see and that you will see in all of these guys. After Pearl Harbor, he was assigned to the general staff where he had various appointments. He worked with Marshall as assistant chief of staff in charge of new operations division. Then he replaces in 23rd of June, 1942, he replaced Major General James E. Cheney as Commander General of the European Theater of Operations. Now, keep in mind at this point, the European Theater of Operations, we weren't actively in, I guess we were in Italy, but still not in Normandy. November of 42, he was appointed the Supreme Commander of the NATO USA, and that's North African Theater of Operations USA. And he helps plan and execute operations Torch and Husky. President Roosevelt then in December of 43 selects him to be the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, or SHAEF. So keep in mind, this is just 7 months prior to the Normandy landing is when he is officially picked to be the Supreme Allied Commander. I should say too that photo is a fairly well-known one of him talking on June 5th to paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division around Greenham Common Airfield. And post-World War II, he From May to November, he is military governor of the zone of occupation, May to November 1945. He becomes chief of staff of the United States Army from November of 45 to February 1948. Obviously, most of you know he was president of the United States 1953 to 1961. And after his retirement, he moves to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Some of you have probably visited his house. He's buried, or he died at Walter Reed Army Medical Center at the age of 78. He is not buried in Arlington. He's buried in the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum Chapel in Abilene, Kansas. So stepping down now to, I guess you'd say, to the 12th Army Group. So an Army Group commander, Omar Nelson Bradley, born in Clark, Missouri. He was born into poverty. His father was a teacher who died when he was 15. The mother remarried and moved and remarried, I should say. He graduated from the U.S. Military Academy in the class of 1915. A Sunday school teacher encouraged him to take the exam to get into the U.S. Military Academy, and he graduated with a rank of 44 out of 164. Before World War I, if he graduated in 1915, he had just a couple years before America entered the war. So he was assigned to the 14th Infantry Regiment, and he saw some service along the Mexican border. He never served overseas. He guarded the Butte, Montana copper mine, which was considered a strategic resource. He finally got into the 19th Division in August 1918, and that division was scheduled for deployment overseas, but influenza and the armistice came first. So he ended up never making it overseas during World War I. Intra-war, he did a variety of positions. Again, you can see the progression here, as with all of these people that went on to be the major generals in World War II. One thing I thought interesting was he was an assistant professor of math at South Dakota State University. I'm not sure how he ended up doing that with the military, but that would be an interesting thing to look into a little bit more with his career. He studied at the U.S. Command and General Staff School at Fort Leavenworth. He was an instructor of tactics at the U.S. Army Infantry School. You'll note he met Marshall there when Marshall was the assistant commandant. He taught then at the U.S. Military Academy. He studied at the Army War College. He began working in the War Department. Then he began reporting directly to Chief of Staff George C. Marshall. On the 20th of February 1941, he was promoted to a temporary rank of Brigadier General and put in command of the U.S. Army Infantry School at Fort Benning. And he, in 1940-41, he assisted in the training known as the Louisiana Maneuvers, which were large-scale training. There were a couple large-scale training maneuvers in the southern states designed to help prove readiness or improve our readiness before World War II. On the 25th of March, he was made temporary Major General, and he took command of the 82nd Infantry Division. At that point in 1942, the 82nd was not an airborne division. Just 3 months later, he took command of the 28th Infantry Division. In early 43, he was given command of 8th Corps, but instead he went to Africa as Eisenhower's troubleshooter. And I have a quote here from Eisenhower about him. He said, "There is very little I need to tell you about him," and him being Bradley, "because he is running absolutely true to form all the time. He has brains, a fine capacity for leadership, and a thorough understanding of the requirements of modern battle. He has never caused me one moment of worry. He is perfectly capable of running an army. He has the respect of all his associates, including all the British officers that have met him." And that, of course, would help him continue on the pattern of progression. He succeeds Patton as commander of the 2nd Corps in Operation Husky in April of 1943. And then in September 43, he's transferred to London as commander-in-chief of the American Ground Forces. And I don't remember the date, or I don't recall the date exactly, where he was chosen to command the American First Army at D-Day. He also planned Operation Cobra. And finally, in the summer of 1944, he is given command of the 12th Army Group. And let me just say here, during the Battle of the Bulge, there's a couple of comments on his leadership style. Unlike some of the more colorful generals of World War II, Bradley was polite and courteous in his public appearances. A reticent man, Bradley was the first favorably brought to the public attention by war correspondent Ernie Pyle, who was urged by General Eisenhower to go and discover Bradley. So he's not a person, he's not a big ego that wants to be seen. He's more of a quiet, just good all-around organizer. And it was Eisenhower that encouraged Pyle to go talk to Bradley and get to know him and give him a little publicity. And then the next quote is, while Patton is often viewed as the archetype of intolerant, impulsive commander, Bradley actually sacked far more generals and senior commanders during World War II, whereas Patton relieved only one general from his command, Orlando Ward, for cause during the entire war, and only after giving General Ward 2 warnings. But there was one controversy over Bradley's leadership plan, and that involved the lack of American use of specialized tanks, or what you call Hobart's funnies in the Normandy invasion. That was kind of a slight ding on his at D-Day, a slight ding on his career. These are pictures. I had to show this. He just looks too serious. It's hard. Those are two pictures, but there's other ones too. He was, he just seemed to be much more of a serious, very, very straight, tall, standing at attention type person. Not, not one that you would necessarily, from looking at these two pictures, is not a guy that you'd want to go out to drinks with on a Friday night, but certainly seemed to get the job done. And in 1951, he published a book called A Soldier's Story. So here, just a little bit on his post-war career. I'll just say, he too became chair. He became the first chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was Chief of Staff of the United States Army before that. He was also the fifth and last person to be promoted to the rank General of the Army, and he served as the Joint Chief of Staff through the Korean conflict, retiring in August 1953 from active duty. And he died in 1981 in New York City, buried at Arlington National Cemetery. So we're going to step down now and go to the individual Army commanders. Bradley ended World War II, I should say, as commander of the 12th Army Group. Now we're going to look at the individual Army groups. And Courtney Hicks Hodges, who was of the became leader of the First Army. Commanding officer of the First Army. So he was born the fourth of 8 children. His father owned the Houston County, Georgia Home Journal. And he dropped out of U.S. Military Academy because he had difficulty with geometry. So in 1906, he enlisted as a private with Company L of the 17th Infantry Regiment in Fort McPherson, Georgia. He rose to the rank of sergeant quickly. He does take a competitive exam in 1909 and ends up in November 1909, becomes second lieutenant and is assigned to the 13th Infantry Regiment. At some point, he served with Marshall in the Philippines and with Patton along the Mexican border. So he got to meet 2 of his peers, prominent peers, let's put it that way. During World War I, he served in the 6th Infantry Regiment of the 5th Division. I don't have the date that he was promoted to lieutenant colonel, and he commanded a battalion during the San Miguel and the Meuse-Argonne offensive, and he earned a Distinguished Service Cross for leading troops in an attack across the Meuse River the night of the 3rd and 4th of November. And I have a quick thing here from Edlin Gels to Conquer Hell. Finally, this quote begins, finally, the American commander, Lieutenant Colonel Courtney H. Hodges, ran along the embankment, ordering the doughboys to stand up at the prearranged signal and open fire on the cove with every weapon they could find. All the commotion had fully aroused the Germans, however, and when the Americans opened their small arms barrage, it seemed that every machine gun in Germany was fired right back. So that gives you a little bit of that night, his role in the night assault, leading it, I should say. In between the wars, he saw occupation duty in Germany. He taught at the U.S. Military Academy. 1925, he graduated from the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. He went on to be an instructor at the U.S. Army Infantry School and Air Corps Tactical School at Maxwell Field, Alabama. In the 30s, he was a member of the infantry board at Fort Benning. He completed studies at the U.S. Army War College in 1934. He became an assistant commandant at the U.S. Army Infantry School. He became commandant at the U.S. Army Infantry School in 1940, and there he befriended General Bradley. During World War II, he was promoted to Major General in May of 41. He had various assignments, including Chief of Infantry. He was given command of 10th Corps, which was a stateside corps. He was named Deputy Commanding General of the 1st Army under Lieutenant General Omar Bradley. And then when Bradley was promoted to the 12th Army in August of 44, he became the commander of the 1st Army. And he continued on to, post-World War II, he continued on to command the 1st Army from Governor's Island, New York. He retired in March of 1949 from active duty. He died in San Antonio in 1966 at the age of 79, and he is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And if I had had time, I would have gone to Arlington before to get photos of all of these graves, and that's on my do list. The next person I almost don't even want to talk about because people know so much about him, but needless to say, General George Smith Patton Jr., who was commander of the 3rd Army during or most known for his generalship of the 3rd Army during World War II. And he was born, you can see he was born with a little bit more higher upper class background. His father was a lawyer in Los Angeles. His mother was the daughter of Benjamin Davis Wilson, who was the 2nd mayor of Los Angeles. He attended VMI in 1903 to 1904, and then he attended the U.S. Military Academy in the class of 1909, graduating with a rank of 46 out of 103rd. Here's a lot about his pre-World War I, his career. The one thing I would mention is he definitely, I don't want to say played the game, but he definitely was very proactive in trying to get where he wanted to go. And you can see that he used a friend's influence to get posted to the 8th Cavalry in Fort Bliss, Texas. And I'm assuming part of that is because of the excitement along the border relative to, let's say, being a commander in an army post out in Washington State somewhere. He appealed directly to Pershing to ensure that he command troops in the Mexican punitive expedition. And as a result, he was assigned to Troop C of the 13th Cavalry. So there were several examples of this in his career where he does that. And coming up here at the outbreak of the war, he requests to join General Pershing's staff. So having already met Pershing in the Mexican punitive expedition. So on the 28th of May, 1917, he leaves with Pershing's advance party, and he is from Governor's Island in New York, and he's initially assigned as post adjutant commanding headquarters at company at Chaumont. And he's in the hospital. While he's in the hospital for jaundice, he meets Fox Connor, who encourages him to join the tanks. Again, a very successful or lucky meeting, or maybe fruitful is the right adjective to use. And then 10th of November, 1917, he is assigned to establish an AEF light tank school. On the 23rd of March, the first 10 tanks arrive. August, of course, is the San Miguel offensive. And then in the Meuse-Argonne on the 26th of September, he's wounded on day one and is in the hospital for most of the rest of the war. But he receives the Silver Star, which is later upgraded for his efforts, later upgraded to a Distinguished Service Cross for his actions on that first day in leading the tanks on the first day of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. He turned on 11th of November 1918. He was only 33 years old, so still relatively young. And he met Eisenhower in 1919, various posts during this period, including the office of the Chief of Cavalry, where he begins to develop methods for organized warfare. In June of 1932, he he graduates as a distinguished graduate of the Army War College. And in it should actually read July of 1932. Let me just find my note here real quick. He was July of 1932. He was ordered as executive officer of the 3rd Cavalry, ordered by Chief of Staff MacArthur to march on the bonus army, which Patton found most distasteful. He wouldn't say anything more than that, but that was the adjective that he used to describe the march or his attack on the march. Some of the things that I don't have here, because there's so many things I could put in 1935, he was transferred to the Hawaiian Division to serve as G2, and he gets into a long feud with Hugh Drum, also from World War I days. He was upset with the rising Japanese imperialism in Asia. And that gets him into a little bit of trouble and hot water between him and Drum. He ultimately takes to drinking and having an affair with his 21-year-old niece, but finally stops before it gets too far, and his wife continues to support him and get him back. In 1937, he sails back to Los Angeles for extended leave. He had been kicked by a horse and fractured his leg and developed phlebitis, which almost killed him, and he had a 6-month administrative assignment then at the cavalry school at Fort Riley. During World War II, in the 15th of January, 42, he became commander of the 1st Armored Corps. In September 42, he works with Eisenhower on Operation Torch in French North Africa. Spring of 1943, he replaces Major General Lloyd Frendell as head of the 2nd Corps in North Africa, and he is promoted to Lieutenant General. Then you have Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. The 3rd of August, 1943, you have the slapping incident that everybody knows of from the movie. The 26th of January, 44, he's officially given command of the 3rd Army, but that becomes the Ghost Army to convince the Germans that he's going to land elsewhere. And finally, in July 1944, the 3rd Army does land in France. Obviously, his death on the 21st of December under suspicious circumstances is fairly well documented, and he's buried at the Luxembourg American Cemetery. He wanted to be buried with his troops. William Hood Simpson was best known for commander of the 9th Army, and he was born in Weatherford, Texas in 1888. His father was a rancher and the mother was the daughter of a prominent lawyer. He went to the U.S. Military Academy, the class of 1909, so classmates included Patton and Devers, and he ranked 101 out of 103. So not a particularly great ranking, but he seems to have made up for it. Again, a little bit on his pre-World War I background. I think one of the interesting things was in February 1917, he became aide-de-camp to Brigadier General George Bell, commander of the El Paso Military District. And then in looking at his World War I, September to October 1917, he accompanied Bell on a tour of the Western Front. Bell became commanding officer of the 33rd Division at Camp Logan, Texas, and Simpson became his assistant chief of staff. In May of 1918, the 33rd arrived in France. In June of 1918, he was promoted to major and he attends the AEF General Staff College. You can see the 1st of September, he became an assistant to the G2 of the 33rd Division. In 15th of September, he becomes assistant to the G3. 4th of October, he actually becomes the G3 of the Army of the 33rd Division. And in the 17th of November, he becomes chief of staff of the 33rd Division. So he rose up right through, pretty much his whole career was in World War I was with the 33rd Division, progressing up in various positions. And he received the Distinguished Service Medal for his work. During the intra-war period, he's posted to the 6th Division in Camp Grant, Illinois. And then he served in the office of Chief of Infantry. He attends the advanced course at the Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia. In 1924 to 25, the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. 1927 to 28, the U.S. Army War College. He works in the War Department of the General Staff with Latin American section for a bit. And then he becomes aide de camp in the 2nd Infantry Division. In April to September 1941, he commanded the Infantry Replacement Training Center at Camp Walters, Texas. So that moves him away from a divisional command. But then on October 41 to April of 42, he's commander of the 35th Infantry Division. So just going on, he commanded the 30th Infantry for a while. Then he assumes command of the 12th Corps, again, continuing to rise up the ranks, so to speak, or climb the ladder. He commanded the 4th Army, which was headquartered in the Western US for a while in 44. And then, let me just see, I think on the 22nd of June, 44, I'm looking at my OneNote, divides and Simpson and most staff. Oh, I see. Sorry, the 4th Army was divided, and Simpson and most of the staff moved to 8th Army headquarters in preparation for going overseas. And on the 22nd of June, 1944, command was redesignated the 9th U.S. Army, and it left for the UK. And on the 29th and 30th of August, the 9th Army lands on Utah Beach, becoming part of the 12th Army Group. And this is an interesting thing. I don't know how many of these generals made it to the cover of Life or Life magazine or Time magazine during that period, but that certainly says something about him and his recognition. Eisenhower summarized his experience with Simpson as follows: "If Simpson ever made a mistake as an Army commander, it never came to my attention. After the war, I learned that he had for some years suffered from a serious stomach disorder, but I would never have suspected anything during hostilities. Alert, intelligent, and professionally capable, he was of the type of leader that American soldiers deserve. In view of his brilliant service, it was unfortunate that shortly after the war, ill health forced his retirement before he was promoted to a 4-star grade, which he had so clearly earned." So a little bit after post-war, he had a few posts in the U.S. He retired officially on November 30th, 1946, with a physical disability. He was promoted in 1945. He was promoted to, I think that should read 1954. He was promoted to full general while he was in retirement. And he died in 1980 in Brooke Army Medical Center in Houston, Texas, at the age of 92. And he is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 30, Site 395. So I'm looking at the time here. It's been about 45 minutes, maybe a little bit less. I've got I've got several corps commanders, and I also wanted to go through one aviation person, and that is General Spatz. Sal or Shelley, do you want me to continue with each of these, or do you want me to just go? I can jump to Carl Spatz and then with a conclusion at the end, if that's preferred, given the amount of time.
Well, I think you should do whatever you chose and feel comfortable with, Randy. But you're fascinating me in a number of them in every way. Well, you want to do a couple more and then jump to the
Okay.
aviation? That'll be
Okay.
fun.
I'll do that. I'll do a couple of the more. We're gonna go. Whoops. Let's see here. I'm gonna go to Collins, and I'll do one or two more of those, and then I'll go to the aviation, just so I'm not taking everybody's full afternoon. But Joseph Lawton Collins, born 1st of May 1896, he was of a large Irish Catholic family. His parents owned and operated a dry goods store and pub in New Orleans. And he was selected to attend the U.S. Military Academy as an alternate by a representative. Classmates included General Ridgway, and Dutch Dakota. During World War II, he was assigned a platoon leader and then commander of the 22nd Infantry Regiment. He attended the U.S. Infantry School of Arms at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. July 1918, he took command of the 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry Regiment, but again, He was one of these that never fought in France during World War I. During the interwar period, I'll just comment on a few of these. You can see the typical positions that almost all of these guys had. Teaching, a lot of the good number of them taught at the U.S. Military Academy, or they attended the U.S. Army Infantry School. He also attended the U.S. Army Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And then he instructed as a weapons and tactics at the U.S. Army Infantry School, and that's where he met George C. Marshall. Then he ended up with some service in the Philippines, graduated from the Army Industrial College, graduated from the Army War College. He taught at the Army War College. He was appointed Chief of Staff of the 7th Corps. During World War II, he starts out in the Chief of Staff of the Hawaiian Department, and he is a commanding general of the in 42 to 43, he's commanding general of the 25th Infantry Division, fighting in the Pacific. And that's where he earned the nickname Lightning Joe for his dash and aggression during Guadalcanal. And he was awarded the Silver Star. Now, this is interesting because he's one of the few guys in this list that served both in the Pacific Theater and in the European theater. And he's transferred to the European theater of operations in part because of his experience with amphibious invasions. And that's where he's given that's when he's given the command then of the 7th Corps. The one thing he had a comment on with regards to a comparison of the Germans and the Japanese. The German was far more skilled than the Japanese. Most of the Japanese that we fought were not skilled men, not skilled leaders. The German had a professional army. The Japanese didn't know how to handle combined arms, the artillery and the support of the infantry to the same extent as we did. They were gallant soldiers, though. They fought very, very hard, but they were not nearly as skilled as the Germans. But the German didn't have the tenacity of the Japanese. And so that was his view after fighting in both wars. And here's a picture, a photo of him. It's explaining to Bradley how Cherbourg was taken. And again, you can see how Bradley just looks so serious in most of these Signal Corps photos, and almost out of place, or not, I don't know, not comfortable, I guess is the right phrase I would say. But Bradley commented, had we created another European theater of operation army, despite his youth and lack of seniority, Collins certainly would have been named the commander. So after World War II, he too becomes Chief of Staff of the United States Army from August of 49 to August of 53. And he was closely associated with the formation of NATO during this time, and he retires from active service in March of 1956, died in Washington, D.C. in 1987, and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And I'm going to just jump to Manton Sprague Eddy, because he's a little bit of a character too. There's not a lot known about him, about Chicago and his background. He was from Chicago, but I couldn't find that much about his background.
Excuse me, Randy, check his birthday.
Oh, 1890. Okay, 1890. That should be 1892. Thank you. Education was Shattuck Military School in Faribault, Minnesota, the class of 1913. He enlisted in the infantry in 1916, so just a little bit before we entered the war. In World War I, he is commissioned as second lieutenant. He's promoted to captain, and he became a company commander in the 11th Machine Gun Battalion of the 4th Division. He's wounded in August, but he's returned to duty, and he ends up commanding a machine gun battalion until war's end. So he does make it overseas, and he does see active combat in the 4th Division. Interwar, he served in the occupation of Germany. He was a student and instructor at both the U.S. Army Infantry School at Fort Benning and the Army Command and Staff School at Fort Leavenworth. He met Marshall at the infantry school. He was a professor of military service and science and tactics at Riverdale Military Academy, Riverdale, Utah. He ends up as an intelligence officer with 3rd Corps. And in 1941, he assumes the command of the 114th Infantry Regiment of the 44th Infantry Division, which was a National Guard division. He became, in March 42, he became the aide-de-camp of the 9th Infantry Division. In the 8th of August, he becomes commander of the 9th Infantry Division. He participates in that's in 1942. He participates in Operation Torch in North Africa, participated in the fighting around Kasserine Pass, Operation Husky in Sicily, and the 9th Division landed at Utah Beach on D-Day +4. And he participated in the assault on Cherbourg and received the Distinguished Service Cross. In August of 44, he becomes commander of 12th Corps. And in April 1945, he returns to the U.S. for a period due to hypertension. And he was ultimately recovered, but he was replaced by Major General Stafford Leroy Irwin for a command of 12th Corps. But that's what he's most known for. And he served as the commandant of the United States Command and General Staff College from January 48 to July of 1950. Later, he was commander of the 7th Army, and he died in 1962 at Fort Benning, Georgia, and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. So we're going to jump through Ridgway and just go on to Carl Spaatz to get one aviation person in here, at least from World War I. He was from Boyertown, Pennsylvania, and his father was a state senator and ran a small printing press and small newspaper, the Berks County Democrat. And the family name was Spatz, S-P-A-T-Z, or Spatz, S-P-A-T-Z. They added, in 1937, they added a second A, making it Spatz. He graduated from the U.S. Military Academy in 1914, the class of 14. His father largely got him that position. And you can see that he ranked 97 out of 107. Pre-World War I, he saw service with the Signal Corps Aviation School in San Diego, California for pilot training in October 1915 to May of 1916. He served in the 1st Aero Squadron during the Mexican Punitive Expedition. During World War II, he initially commanded the 31st Aero Squadron. I'm not sure I don't believe that squadron ever saw any service. It was set up, I think, prepared for service, but it never went into service. But he became an instructor at the 3rd Aviation Instruction Center at Issoudun, France. And for 3 weeks, he was a fighter pilot with the 13th Aero Squadron. America's First Eagles credits him with 2 victories. In the interwar period, he led a troop of Victory Loan Flying Circus, so promoting victory loans and paying off the war debts, etc. And then you can see he has quite a number. Most of his career after that goes along the aviation side and tracks along the aviation side. What's kind of unique is in 1940, he spent several weeks in England as a military observer during the Battle of Britain. But rumors had it that he was a German spy, given the name. So I think that probably brought him back to the U.S. in August of 1940. Then he was assigned to the Office of Chief of Air Corps. And in October of 1940, he is appointed assistant to the Chief of Air Corps, Hap Arnold, which is a very fortuitous posting and certainly helps him throughout the rest of his career. Marshall, the Chief of Staff, in January 42, named Spaatz commander of the Air Force Combat Command. In May of 42, he becomes commander of the 8th Air Force. He transfers over to England. He's placed overall command of the U.S. Army Air Force in the European Theater of Operations. And in January 1944, he's named commander of the U.S. Strategic Forces in Europe. He directed the U.S. portion of the strategic bombing campaign under the direct command of Eisenhower. In March of 44, he proposed the oil plan for bombing, which in September then, 1944, the oil plan became the highest priority, where the bombardment, the idea was to take out the oil production facilities of the Germans, so that and the manufacturing of ersatz replacement fuels, so that the Luftwaffe could not effectively intervene with the what else was in any of the air combat. One of the interesting trivia things is he was the only person of general rank or equivalent to be present at all three surrenders. And I wrote down here Nazi surrenders. I should have changed that. He was present at Reims on May 7th, and he was present in Berlin on May 8th. And then he was on the USS Missouri on September 2nd when the Japanese surrendered. And after VE Day, he assumes command of the U.S. Strategic Air Forces in the Pacific, headquartered in Guam. Here's just a photo of him inspecting some of the German production facilities in underground in World War II, at the end of World War II. And once Hap Arnold retired in 46, he is appointed commanding general of the Army Air Forces. Technically, he becomes the first chief of staff of the United States Air Force once the United States Air Force is formed. And he retires with the rank of general on the 30th of June, 1948. He did serve for a while as the chairman of the Civil Air Patrol's National Board, and he dies in 1974 at the age of 83. He's buried at the Air Force Academy, which is probably no surprise rather than being buried at Arlington. And for those of you that have gone to the Reading Air Show in Pennsylvania, the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum, Spatz Field is named, the airfield there is named in honor of him. So conclusions out of this was a very fast moving, high level overview, but relationships count. And in many ways, the military is no different than a large corporation. And I would say the higher you move up the ladder, the smaller that circle of people become. And you can see plenty of examples in here that I gave where two people were at the same place at the same point in time. And, they were impressed by each other, or one was impressed by the other, whatever. Education, 6 went to the U.S. Military Academy, 3 from VMI, 2 from another, and 1 didn't graduate. Class rank was mixed, but basically the great majority, 75% of these were either the U.S. Military Academy or VMI. With regards to World War I duty, 8 of them served overseas, but not all led troops in combat. 4 served stateside, and most were relatively young in their careers, so they didn't have real senior careers in World War I. And I'll just say this, when I started to put this together, I started the other way. I started looking at the World War I generals to see what happened to them, and the key leaders, see what happened to them in World War II. For the most part, because of their ages already in World War I, they did not serve a particularly large role in World War II. So this group that moved from World War I to World War II were junior officers and much younger in their career in World War I, so that then they were ready when World War II came. And early duty stations, a significant number of them spent time in Philippines, the Mexican border, the Veracruz occupation, the Panama Canal Zone, and Hawaii. So it was really interesting. I'll say this too. I don't know how many of you have a military career or military background, but not having one myself, I've been a war gamer and I've been a reenactor for years. But when I was sitting down doing this, there definitely was that progression in terms of where they went. And Shelley's probably nodding her head tremendously because she's married to a military person. But there's definite progression, especially when you're on the road to general, becoming a general officer. It really is a very similar career path with all of these guys. So that's my comments. I hope you found it a little bit interesting and not too overwhelmed by so many dates.
Well, thank you very much, Randy, for doing an excellent job. I only have one question for you.
Sure.
Was it in World War I that we established a war college, or whatever they call that?
I believe the War College was in place already. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, please.
All right, it's open for questions. Come on, people.
But
Let's hit Randy
I'll check
hard.
into that. Let me check into that too, because when the War College was established, but I think it was already in place.
I'm looking at it right now.
Randy, I know that the War College existed in like 1917, but I can't tell you when it started.
Yeah.
Looks like it was started in 1901,
Okay.
at least the Army War College.
Yep.
I thought it was a result of the Spanish-American War.
It was what?
The result of the Spanish-American War.
Okay. Thank you.
It's possible. Yes, it's very
Yeah.
possible.
That sounds right. Okay.
Come on, questions, please. Let's hit Randy hard.
I won't hit it hard, but I'm going to add something about Eisenhower that most people don't know, that will enhance your next presentation. His family was not just merely religious, they were Church of the Brethren, which is, sort of a lot like the Amish. They wore black in that era, and they
Okay.
were very, very opposed to war. So one can only imagine how unpopular he was, at least initially, with his family when he joined up.
That's interesting. I did not know that. I knew they were devout, but I didn't know they were opposed to war.
My great grandfather also lived in Abilene, and they were in the same Church of the Brethren sect, and sect probably is a correct word.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question for you.
Uh-oh. Yes.
That's all right. It'll be a good one, I hope. You made enough comments about Bradley
Mm-hmm.
during this presentation. Would Bradley really have been an effective general without Patton being in his shadow? And initially, of course, he reported to Patton in North Africa. But what's your opinion after looking at both these guys? Because pretty much Patton led the way for most of Bradley's actions.
I would actually like to I'd like to read Bradley's book, and I haven't done it yet. I gave the name of it, I think, but if you wrote it in 1951, I'd like to get a little bit more into that.
I have read it.
I think though, I personally have I don't like egos. And Patton is one of those officers that has that, as is MacArthur. I think Simpson, for Simpson to get on the cover of Life magazine, I think he did well. I think these others did well. I think it was just that Patton is the better known.
I think Bradley had a quiet ego, but he didn't, if you read his book, he doesn't miss a chance to take shots at Patton.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I agree.
I mean, Patton was a good commander, but the other thing is the other way, and you and I'll have to disagree on this, but it was coalition warfare. And I think Eisenhower and Bradley did much better in coalition warfare than Patton did.
Well, there's
And,
much
yeah.
better politicians.
I mean,
Can I throw something in? Is that Bradley had difficulty with the British, and he had a rather low opinion of a number of British generals. I don't know whether that was brought out, but I wonder how Eisenhower handled that.
I didn't bring that out as much, and part of that stems to the fact that during the Battle of the Bulge, for a period of time, he was put under Montgomery's command.
That's
because of the way the lines were formed. So that certainly disfavored him in terms of his like for the British.
I want to throw one more thing. I don't know whether you knew this, but when Churchill visited the United States and Marshall was in the hospital, that's the one thing he wanted to see before he went back to England, was to visit Marshall in the hospital. And Marshall was unconscious, but nevertheless, he went out of his way to see him because he had said earlier, and I want you to know this, Churchill said of all the generals he ever knew, Marshall was the best he had ever known and honored.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yes.
I want to make one last comment about Patton and
Sure.
Patton, Bradley, and the British.
Yep.
Martin Blumenson wrote a book on fillets,
Uh-huh.
and he really points out that Bradley disliked the British, but he wasn't going to make any waves. So he kept Patton back, where Patton was perfectly willing to just keep going until he ran into the British. And Patton, while having an ego, he wasn't bothered so much by other people that had egos. So Blumenson feels that Patton actually got along with the British better than Bradley did, because Bradley would kind of get in a sulk.
Interesting. That's interesting color. I'll have to look up that book on flays. Thank you.
Bob, did you want to mention your comment in the chat about the greatest generation?
Oh, I bring that up on a regular basis. I have strong opinions that the Second World War generation would have been the greatest generation if the World War I veterans hadn't led the way for the World War II veterans. So to me, you could include them as one and the same, I guess. I think your distinction, Randy, of the older leaders not making it into World War II is very valid.
Yeah.
Without the experience of a Marshall, of a MacArthur, even what Eisenhower did in those World War I years, and to me, are they really the World War II generation, or are they the World War I generation? Or is it the same generation?
It's interesting because, yeah, I totally started this and I was getting very depressed because it wasn't working out. None of the well-known guys from World War I, the senior leaders, made it really for the most part to World War II. But you're right, the mentorship and in that close knit, especially as you're moving up the command path towards general, that close knit thing really, there was definitely an overlap.
Well, and Fox Connor was probably the biggest mentor for Eisenhower and Patton that there was.
Yeah.
They spent time in the Panama Canal Zone together.
Yeah.
He, to me, is the enigma in this whole thing.
Yeah.
He was.
No,
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Randy, go.
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying, I'm agreeing. Yeah. So it was a very interesting overlap. As I, what I ultimately ended up with was not what I expected when I started out.
It was good.
Yeah.
Good work.
Randy, I have one more point to ask about it. In the interwar years, no sooner than the war ended in World War I, 1918, there was already a reaction in America about whether we should have gone into World War I at all. I want to know, did they take out any of this feeling on any of these generals throughout the 20s and 30s?
I didn't really look at that. I'm not sure that they did. Probably one of the things to look at would be the funding of the military.
Yes.
And, that probably is the most telltale. And the downsizing. The other thing is, there were three in the armistice. I don't remember if it's the armistice or if it's the technically in the Versailles Treaty. I think it was both. Armistice too. There were three bridgeheads of 30 kilometers or 18 miles over the Rhine River. And the British held Cologne, the French held Mainz or Mayen, and the Americans held Koblenz.
That's right.
But we left Koblenz. If you go to Ehrenbreitstein, that big fortress up on top of the hill, you can see information on this. We left Koblenz in 1923 already. So we certainly went to isolationism. I don't know that there was a real backlash against the generals publicly, like maybe after the Vietnam War. But we certainly there was a strong move to isolationism.
Oh yeah, very clear. Yeah, very clear. Yeah. Well, Randy, you did an excellent job, and I want to hear more about this Andy Pouncey that you mentioned, because I'd like to get this, and if Shelley would give me his email, and I'll be able to contact him. You may have him for our August 10th presentation. So to everybody, I thank you very much for attending this excellent presentation, and the research that Randy did was incredible. Let's give him a big hand for a wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yep. Just don't tell Marcus, because this was my trial run for this.
I taped it and already sent it to Marcus, Randy.
Okay. The guy I do most of my tours with, Sal, and for people that don't know me, I do, most of my tours are with a German partner, business partner, Marcus Klauer. And he's got his side, he's got from World War I to World War II on the German side. So theoretically, we're going to do this both together at some point in the future. But
Excellent. Looking forward to that. Wonderful.
okay, thanks, everybody.
Hey, thank you.
All right, Shelley.
Whoop. Hold on, I muted you by accident.